increase in pressure. Now the water might not be hot enough, so we'll see how well this goes.
So that's a live feed from our very expensive camera.
Oh yeah.
And now you can tell there's nothing in the live feed.
So we just put a good amount of dry ice in, as much as we can, and seal this. Which is very, very tough technique passed down from Dr. Cole. So,
You've got a lot of practice.
yes. Colin and I, we did this a lot last semester. And so generally it takes about, it takes about 10 seconds to get going. But hopefully we should see it liquefy and pressurize as well. And you'll start to see them get a little bit more liquidy.
Mm-hmm. They're going to sweat. Those crystals are going to sweat.
That's kind of better.
I hope. Oh, yeah. There it goes. There it goes. You see it?
Yeah. Okay, so you see just start dripping.
Well, who says college isn't a site?
Yeah.
And
so what do they see?
So now, right now, you're seeing what's called the triple point, which is, I guess, the visual, a visual of of all three solid, liquid, and gaseous states appearing at the same time. So you can see the chunks of dry ice, you can see the liquid carbon dioxide, and you can see the gaseous carbon dioxide bubbles forming, and now you can hear them coming out of the system. And so what's cool, or what kind of allows it for this triple point to form, is the fact that gas can't escape. And so because gas is escaping, more bubbles form, or more gaseous carbon dioxide forms to take its place to maintain that pressure. And this is essentially what we did to extract phthalate from our soft baits, Kyle and I.
So you used an environmentally benign liquid that doesn't pollute the atmosphere to get the plasticizer out of the soft bait for analysis. So doing that type of analysis in a way that is good for the environment is something that we as green chemists, in fact Christians who are chemists, are very interested in doing.
And one of my favorite parts about this is when you release the pressure, it
yes.
re-solidifies. Back into dry ice. So it looks a lot of focus.
That really is pretty cool. How cool is it? How cool is it? You got a temperature, guys? That you can quickly guess?
Negative 56.4 degrees. I believe it's in Celsius. Yes, Celsius is the point where you see that triple point. So below that, it's going to solidify.
Yep.
Okay.
So a very cold day in Siberia. We don't do experiments at that temperature usually. All right, so they use the liquid carbon dioxide to separate the plasticizer from the plastic, analyze both using our instrument called an IR. And what they were looking for was to see the carbon double bond oxygen on there. And when that carbon double bond oxygen is in this particular environment, close by to a 6-membered ring with alternating double and single bonds, then you get a peak in the spectrum that is at 1725 reciprocal centimeters. So if we see a 1725 peak or even a 1720 peak on the IR, we know that a phthalate plasticizer molecule is being used in that object. That's how we figure it out without like chewing on it and tasting it, right? Because chemists don't want to do that. Sometimes you die. Okay. Hopefully, no, I think we're in a different mode again. Good. Now, if you can make a plasticizer that is not a phthalate, maybe you won't change boys into girls, hamsters, boys hamsters into girls hamsters. So that might be a thing to understand. And the marketers of these soft baits have figured out that maybe they can sell more soft baits if they use a phthalate-free soft bait. So what we wanted to find out as chemists is, well, what molecule are they using? They have to use a molecule to accomplish that goal. What kind of molecule do they use? We tried to figure it out because it's not published anywhere that I'm able to discover. So we did the CO2 extraction, just like you saw, of the soft baits, and the IR says that the chemical used in these baits is very consistent with this structure. Notice there are a lot of commonalities to the previous molecule, the phthalate molecule, that's going to change boy hamsters into girl hamsters, potentially. And that difference has to do just with this 6-membered ring. The double bonds to single bonds are gone. If that's the case, we suddenly have a different chemical. So the marketers can appropriately say, this is a phthalate-free soft bait. Of course, a biologist, I hope, would be interested in figuring out, well, okay, it's different, so the marketers can say that and not be lying, but is it really safe? And as a chemist, I'm not qualified to do that kind of research, so if you're really interested in it, maybe you can work with one of our biology professors to try to figure that out. They might have some ideas for you, and that could turn into an independent research project, or maybe even to a senior thesis that would go on your resume and make you more attractive to be hired to make money.
And
We're gonna finish here, right? Part?
To win the Nobel Prize.
To win the, well, okay. That might be asking a little bit much of this activity. But so, this is where I actually had it figured out. What I wanted to bring this up for you to see is those are little pieces of soft bait. That's steel wool there, and in the bottom, it's hard to see it so clearly. There's a little bit of wetness, right? That little liquid down at the bottom is the plasticizer that has been separated from these pieces of soft baits. So this is the actual tube, the first tube at Spring Arbor to actually put this into practice. Okay. This is Kent's slide. What's in a soft bait?
So
how do you
we've
figure it out?
So we've done the extraction. John and Kyle both got all of our phthalate out, or our wannabe phthalate, as the producers want to call it, so that they can avoid being evil people. Thank you, Kyle. And Dr. Baldwin talked about some of his favorite machinery upstairs. This is his favorite piece. He uses it a lot. And what it does is it analyzes molecules. We won't get into the nitty gritty, but it shakes them. And it allows us to see bonds inside that molecule, the particular bonds between atoms. Okay, you can switch. This is a scan. It's a little tough to see, but this is a scan that was taken of one of the soft baits. In particular, we like this peak right here, which demonstrates the bond between, this is a carbon atom, and then the oxygen next to it that Dr. Baldwin pointed out earlier. In this particular one, we notice it's at 1729, which corresponds to the phthalate, which is bad because of this ring structure here. The reason it does this, and we won't go too in depth, but this ring can move. The bonds within it can shift around inside the molecule, and as that. So in the top here we have what was shown, and this bond is shifting over, causing a resonance here, and elongating this bond, causing it to shift in the IR spectrum. You can shift that.
So the organic students should be able to understand.
Yeah,
what
everyone
you
in
mean, right?
organic, some of the people in intro will figure this out. Dr. Baldwin, I think it's back to you.
Okay. So the next slide is basically a picture that we took yesterday of the beach ball. So the beach ball has the same phthalates in it, so that you know when you're playing with that beach ball in the summer, you're playing with the same kind of materials that are in the soft bait. Because we proved it with the IR. And we just talked about what it means. Now, chemically, how do we change a pipe into a beach ball, or into a soft bait, or into a pacifier, which, by the way, we don't do that anymore, because we are concerned about changing boys into girls, perhaps. So we have, as a society, decided to make sure that phthalates are not in children's toys, or in pacifiers. And I think that's an abundance of caution, but it's probably a smart thing to do, right? Those of you who have children out in the audience, I hope you're shaking your head affirmatively. And those of you who potentially will have, this could be something that we need to be careful about. But how does it actually work? The molecular background for why this is a solid piece of PVC that you can't see through and that is very brittle. If I pound this with a hammer, it's going to bust into little pieces. So it's brittle and opaque when it's in this form that has very little plasticizer in it, almost none. That is represented by this picture with a bunch of lines. So each of the lines represents a very long molecule called a polymer. And in this case, the polymer is polyvinyl chloride. When you add plasticizer, the plasticizer molecule has the ability to move in between the strands of the polyvinyl chloride molecules and allow those strands to move back and forth relative to each other with less friction. So PVC that's not treated with plasticizer is very crystalline. That's how we talk about it. And you know, crystalline things are brittle and usually not see-through unless you're talking about glass. But when we add the plasticizer, it gets in between and allows those polyvinyl chloride molecules to slide past one another. It gives it a lot more freedom of movement. And that transforms the PVC hard, brittle, opaque plastic into plasticized PVC, which is very rubbery and usually see-through, or can be see-through. So that is the explanation that chemists use. Another way to look at this is if you've ever seen uncooked spaghetti, right? It's hard and brittle and it's usually in a rod, right? Long rod. You put a bunch of those pieces of spaghetti onto a plate, it's not very appetizing. Now, if you were able to add plasticizer, and actually this is what you do when you cook, water is the plasticizer. When you add water in the process of cooking to the spaghetti strands, then they actually soften up. So it's not, it's even more than just a visual analog. It's actually what happens when you cook raw spaghetti. You are plasticizing the spaghetti noodles with water in the same way that we plasticize a PVC pipe and change it into a beach ball, which is, I think that's kind of cool. All right. Let's see. This is my thing. Okay, so what if we wanted to make baits for fish that got around the whole problem, that didn't use polyvinyl chloride, because polyvinyl chloride can be bad for the environment. It has, I'm going to talk about that. Have I gone past that already?
We were going to mention it has chlorine bonds in it,
Okay,
which are
go
very
ahead.
difficult to break down for general organisms. Most of the time you leave food out, it will begin to mold. That's because organisms are starting to break down whatever food that is. If you leave a piece of PVC laying around, it doesn't have that because organisms don't eat PVC. So using it's a bad idea in the environment.
Right, because those microbes don't deal very well with carbon to chlorine bonds. So if we used a different kind of plastic, and if we used a different kind of plasticizer, maybe we could get around this whole thing and produce really, truly good for the environment soft baits that will catch fish. Enter Jell-O. If you really pack in a lot of unflavored gelatin into your recipe and use a little bit of flavored Jell-O and put it into a Petri dish, doesn't this sound all sciencey now that I used a Petri dish? If I'd used a cup from the home, it wouldn't be quite as sciencey. I used a Petri dish. And I've got coming around a sample of exactly this that's up here on the screen. If you cut the Petri dish Jell-O that's solidified in a spiral manner, then you get this long, well, we could call it an intestinal worm, right? If we wanted to be all gross about it. That could be cut up into sections and will go onto a hook and stay there. I might have to put air quotes on the stay there part. But it stayed there long enough, and when I used coffee instead of water, I actually made a soft bait that caught this voracious sunfish. A massive catch, right? Okay, so
How big was that fish?
how about the length of my palm, okay? That was a mambo fish. Now, later we're going to see what the students came up with, and you can compare the level of expertise, professor to student. Okay, so one of my solutions for this issue of getting around the soft bait problem to the environment was to use Jell-O, and it works. Air quote. But I left this in the hands of some of my students, and they came up with a different solution. And I think this is where you can step in.
Yeah.
All right, go for it.
So another way to be green is to recycle. We can recycle things in our environment and make another use of something. So what we did is, this is a window cling, and you can stick these on your window and decorate and be all festive and other types of things. But what we did, me and Brock, is we actually melted these down to recycle them. After they've been hanging in your window, sometimes they fall on the floor, they get full of dirt, and they're just not pleasing to the eye anymore. So we melted these down, and we actually made a mold, a very crude mold, I might mind you, but it worked.
Out of aluminum foil.
Out of aluminum foil
A
and
kid could do
styrofoam.
that.
Right, and so we were actually able to make recycled worms out of these window clings, and it was a phthalate-free soft base. You can pass these around. And then that also led to another science experiment that we were able to do with the kids in Halloween and Science Lab.
Right, let's hold off on that.
Hold off on that.
We'll get to
Okay.
that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it. Right.
Okay, I think so.
And it worked.
It worked.
It worked. This is
It
our.
worked!
It worked.
See, the student doesn't usually get the results that the professor gets, right?
Brock has really big hands.
Yes,
Brock has ginormous hands.
So here's the panfish, the bluegill. Here is the chunk of recycled soft window clings that we use to catch our monstrous fish. So more testing to come. Hopefully we can get the acquired size fish that we could actually survive on, because that would maybe be
One
a
would
snack.
hope.
One would hope.
Okay, so that's going from a window cling to a bait. Well, scientists like to think about doing the opposite of everything. That's when you can get a PhD thesis. And so we thought, what if we changed a soft bait into a window cling? Enter all of the artsy people in the world, right? And Jeff, I'd like you to talk about this project that you participated in. And you actually set it up.
All right, well, this was a project that I conducted alongside with a good friend of mine. His name is Jin. He's no longer with us. He graduated. Our research. I don't mean it that way. But anyways, we took soft baits and we wanted to see if we could make them into window clings. And so first, we had to find a method that produced the least amount of fumes. This probably would have been safer for the kids. And so I melted the baits on a hot plate in a microwave and using a heat gun. And surprisingly, I discovered that the microwave actually produces the least amount of fumes. And then afterwards, we needed to determine the melting point of both our phthalate-containing bait and our biodegradable non-phthalate-containing bait to see which would be safer for the kids. It turns out that the phthalate-containing actually had a melting point of above 120 degrees Celsius, which that can cause some pretty serious burns, and there was some concern there. It turns out the biodegradable bait actually had a melting point of about 60 degrees Celsius, which is roughly the equivalent of just really hot tap water you can get from the sink. It's just that unfortunately further experiments showed that the biodegradable baits, for reasons unknown, really don't make very good window clings. And we had to revert to the phthalate-containing bait.
So what happens if you take the biodegradable bait and put it on the window?
Oh, it comes right off. It stays on for about
So
a
if it's a
second.
window cling that falls off, that's not very good for the kids to make in the winter, right?
And so we did have to come up with some additional safety features just to make sure the kids didn't get burned. But overall, it was a success.
Yeah, so he had to do those melting point determinations using our microlabs equipment upstairs. If you're a freshman here, you have used that over and over and over and over and over. And we applied it to this. Now, to take it further, we wanted to make an activity that could involve and interest children, because that's part of some of the outreach that we do here at Spring Arbor. This is a very intense young person with Halloween-y appropriate costume on, cutting up ew worms, all right, because it's Halloween in the science lab, right? So we got that ooey gooey connection. It's not real worms, all right? They were baits, right, that look and feel like worms, but aren't worms. Just make sure you understand. And all the child has to do is cut them up into little pieces, put them into a beaker, and then based on the research that Jen and Jeff did, we just nuked it in the microwave, and as soon as it melts, it takes the form of the bottom of the beaker. As soon as you let that cool, of course, you do, because it could burn the child, right? So you have units called supervisors, take it out of the microwave oven and let it cool, and then the child can peel it out of the bottom and immediately stick it to any glass surface, and it sticks for months. It stays on the glass as opposed to biodegradable window clings. So here I'm passing around our own work here at Spring Arbor to make window clings from soft baits. And it actually worked. Pretty fun. Yeah, okay. Oh, well that's it, right? Did you guys want to add anything? Did I overlook? I don't want to steamroll anything that you might want to add. So, these are the different teams. You can see the successful fisherman with his appropriate shirt. But, you know, that's not all it's about. And unfortunately, that's just a regular lure. It's like not even making a point appropriate for the seminar. But I caught a fish. That's the real point. All right, so Team IR, Kent and Levi Norris. Levi couldn't be here because he's an ambassador. He had other things to do. Jin is in South Korea, so he's not here today. Jeff, they worked on the bait to cling, soft bait to cling. And then the cling to bait was Nathan and Brock. Brock is doing student teaching, so he couldn't join us today. And then the team CO2 extraction, which I thought was really, really exciting and fun, was done by Kyle. Yeah, your name's spelled right now.
Yes.
Good. All right, and John. They did excellent work, and we were able to turn it into some fun stuff. Also, end of the year projects are being generated from these ideas. There's a lot more stuff to look at. And so when we get to that end of the year poster presentation, I think it's something like May 3rd or May 5th, pay attention to the ones that have to do with the tangential projects from this seminar, because you are now really primed to understand those projects and to share in the excitement of discovery that those students have pioneered. And you gotta have references, right? So JCAM Ed, back in 1969, that's the only other entry of a science laboratory-based experiment that has to do with plasticized PVC. So there is definitely call for doing an update, because that publication is almost as old as I am, right? So I was born in '63. So lots of interesting stuff in the literature, but not too much about doing things in a science lab point of view. So I'm done. Are there any questions? Dr. White's hand went right up there, so I'm going to call on him. But those of you who are students, don't get intimidated. It's going to be a brilliant question because it's Dr. White. But don't think that you can't ask questions too. And we've got this panel of experts up here who actually did the experiments. So if you don't want to talk to me, you can talk to them. Yes?
Who made the Jello lure?
Who made the Jello? That was my contribution.
Now, Jello dissolves in water.
It does.
So how does that work with making a lure out of Jello?
Good question. If you don't use very much water, you guys know what Knox blocks are? You ever had those? It's really almost hard and rubbery, and it takes a lot more time for it to dissolve in the water. So, and that really gets at the heart of what it is to be environmentally sensitive. You want the thing to behave in the way you designed it for the time that you need to use it. But afterwards, you want it to go away. This is a big problem with all plastics. They do what we want them to do until we're tired of that particular color or style, and then we throw them away. What do you think happens to the plastic? Well, it unfortunately continues to be exactly the way we designed it. It doesn't get broken down in the environment. And that's a huge problem. That makes your landfills bigger in volume, and it makes them last for many, many years. I don't know how many, but a long time without being broken down into soil. So the Jello idea is not ideal, but it's closer to being environmentally sensitive. Now, how well does it actually catch fish? Well, you might have to put blinders on when you're looking at the size of the fish, right? Other questions? Dakota?
The phthalate that you determined as the problem, what research was taken for you guys' research to figure out that's the issue at hand?
Like the boys to girls issue?
Like that research.
Okay. That kind of stuff was done, let's see, plasticizers were first made in the 30s?
Yeah, during that time they were using plasticizers and plastic piping for hamster cages, because you want to be able to see through it, which this pipe you can't see through, it's opaque.
Hamster habitat.
So hamster habitats. They wanted to make clear plastics so you could actually see the hamster and enjoy him and I don't know, feed him and things like that, biology things.
Right.
So they started noticing a trend that these hamsters who spent a lot of time with the plastic and touching it, eating off of it, things like that, were having these strange behaviors and going from male to female over courses of generations.
Was it the hamster exposed or was it the progeny?
Progeny. It was the next generation down would have mutations, different limbs, things like that.
Well, and boys to girls. Let's just do uncomfortable. Mary, and then I'll come back down to Dakota.
Well, mine isn't necessarily a question, but hey, take one for the liberal arts. You guys talked about biology and chemistry and art and marketing and government and regulation, and to understand this, we got to know everything.
Yeah, it's not something that I feel qualified to do all by myself.
Yeah.
Dakota?
So with the hamsters, back to hamsters,
Okay, go for it.
so I'm assuming that they have produced a new type of plastic for hamsters. Is that how, did you learn anything from research done there into your research?
No, I didn't. I don't know if they still make those habitats that you can watch them go from one place to another, or if they now make them without the phthalates in the plastic, because there are substitutes that you can make. And you saw that. We've got the phthalate soft baits, and then we've got the non-phthalate soft baits. So maybe you can do the same job with a slightly different chemical. If it's sufficiently different, then it doesn't change boy hamsters into girl hamsters, and you can still see them running from one place to the other. So that's a win-win, right? But we don't really know, and I couldn't find any literature that actually said that the new hamster habitat is good for boys and girls hamsters, but still lets you enjoy seeing them scamper from one place to another.
What we do know, though, is that there has been government research on it, and because of that link, they pulled plasticizers out of industrial plastics, industrial manufacturing. So that doesn't happen with phthalates, like that's been regulated.
Okay. So there have been some rules made in response to research done. But finding that research, that's difficult to do. And it wasn't something that I was able to come up with. Maybe you can. Yeah.
Do you know anything about the fish's preferences for your baits?
Well, if
I ask
that,
this because
that
fish
needs
can
more
actually
research.
smell reasonably well underwater.
So that's why I use the coffee flavored Jello, because I've noticed that you can buy coffee flavored soft baits, and whether or not, I mean, there was interest in the bait.
I mean, if you use chocolate or white chocolate or something like that, different fish have different affinities for it.
That sounds like a research project in the making. What about artificial grape flavor? Maybe that's something to look into. That's a chemical that we can buy, and it can easily be tested. Yeah, Ruben.
So this is a question for the students.
Excellent.
Okay. So I heard the cool people nowadays like to use baits that glow in the dark, and maybe the cool people might also like having window stickers that glow in the dark.
Ah.
So could you add something to make it glow in the dark and still be safe, environmentally safe?
Any ideas, guys? Spin up a project for us.
Yeah. And you could probably work in glow sticks, but I don't know how long it would last. It'd run out pretty quick. I don't know, Dr. K would know the time those last normally.
Well,
I know it's not.
The way that glow sticks work is that when you break the inner, like it contains a little vial on the inside. And when you break it, it mixes the two components in there with the two components on the outside. And basically, the chemical reaction that goes on in a glow stick provides enough energy for the glide to do, or the dye to glow. And so the reason why they die out after so long is because there's not sufficient reactants to keep the reaction up and to maintain that enough energy to make it glow like a lot. So I think when working with glowstones, I don't think they would last long.
First the dye glows and then the glow dies.
Well answered. So funny, I love it.
Yeah, another idea I had for that, for the soft baits, I can imagine there'd be quite a few pores in it. Maybe if you could take bioluminescent bacteria
Ooh.
and incorporate those into the soft baits, that'd be really environmentally friendly. The culture would probably get washed out or die over time. That'd probably last a while.
And it sounds like a business plan right there.
Another idea I just came up with off of that is you could go to the geology department and find a fluorescent crystal and implant that into it. So then it would glow based on the ambient light and fluoresce.
Good work. Spencer.
You said that the soft baits that they're making now are often phthalate free, but that the molecule that works as a plasticizer is pretty similar to the phthalates.
It is
So,
quite similar, yeah.
does it give the similar concerns then for how it's going to affect the environment, or is the molecular structure different enough that it's okay?
I don't have an answer to that question. It's the kind of question that needs to be asked. It is not being asked.
Okay.
Can't find any reference to that type of concern. It's just, well, it's phthalate free.
Okay.
So, if you've got unleaded gas, then there's no lead in it. So all the problems are solved, right? Well, yes and no. Some problems are solved. Maybe some problems are solved by phthalate-free soft baits, but others remain. That's definitely describing the area for further research. Could be very interesting. Okay. If you don't have any other questions, great. If you'd like to come down and feel some soft baits.